Hello and welcome. This is Rhonda Shea. It's nice to be back on the air at KUHS Denver. It's great to be here on this snowy day in Denver and around the world. I'm sure we've got a lot of listeners already tuned in. This is time for the Space Force Association Space Power Show. And your host is Bruce Winters, and it's my pleasure to introduce Bruce. And Bruce, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Rhonda. I'm not in the snowy central lands of the mountains like you are, but still enjoying the day. It's a beautiful day.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm going to bow out because they didn't tune in to listen to me. They tuned in to hear all about space and space news and space power and the Space Force Association and all the great things that you guys have on the agenda for the next several months and into next year. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Rhonda. Appreciate it. And hey, welcome everybody. Super excited that you're joining us. And if this is your first time, we take about an hour or so. We do a little bit of space news just to kind of keep you updated with things, but the primary focus is to get interesting people on the show and talk with them. And we've got a couple of very interesting people today. And then we wrap up the show with a little bit of interesting tech. So that's kind of how it is. I would encourage you, I do have the ability to have a look at the chat. So if you're on the streaming and Zoom, then feel free to drop something in the chat. I'll pick those up as best I can. If you're on the Facebook Live, I'm sorry I don't have access to that right now, but we'll get that in the future. But that's the show today. So let me start with just a couple of interesting pieces of news. So there's a space vehicle called the X-37B out there, kind of top secret stuff. Not really anymore, but it's essentially a small space shuttle, but unmanned. And the Air Force and the Space Force flies that around for years at a time. It's interesting how that works. It's usually unannounced, but being here not far from the Space Center, I hear it every time it comes back with the sonic boom, usually in the middle of the night. But they're doing something interesting. So and it's interesting that it was announced publicly. The X-37B is going to be executing a series of new maneuvers called aerobraking, which allows it to change its orbit around the Earth and it takes some components with it. It's a novel and efficient series of maneuvers that demonstrates the Space Force's commitment to achieving groundbreaking innovation as it conducts national security missions in space. It's the first time that the X-37B is going to do this. So I found that noteworthy. Number one, because it was announced publicly, and number two, aerobraking. That's a pretty interesting capability when you think about being able to maneuver your spacecraft into all kinds of different orbits. So that's exciting. Hey, the other thing I want to mention to you in space news, the Department of the Air Force, in conjunction with the Space Force, is launching something called NIPR GPT or NIPR GPT, and that is an effort to make AI chatbots available to guardians, contractors, essentially folks that are associated with the military, to give them a place where they can learn how to interact and make use of and gain knowledge with AI chatbots. I find that interesting because AI is certainly a brand new tool, and it is a game changer on the battlefield. And it's one thing to have a great tool, but you have to know how to use it. So I like this effort. I just leave you with one quote on this. This is from Chandra Donaldson, acting Chief Data and Artificial Intelligence Officer. She says, we must each learn to use the tools, query, and get the best results. NIPR GPT will allow guardians and airmen to explore and build skills and familiarity as more powerful tools become available. So that's a great step in the right direction, in my view, as well. The other thing that I'll leave you with is just a little look at some upcoming launches. It looks like over the next 3 days, actually, a bunch of Starlink satellites are going to be launched, both at the Kennedy Space Center and at Vandenberg in California. And then New Glenn is going to start launching. They've got some things coming up this month and then into next year. So Blue Origin finally getting in the game there. So there's a little bit of space news for you. But let's get to the fun part. Let's get to what's really interesting. I've got two great guests today. I'm super excited. So one of you know already. It's Bill Wolf. He's the president and CEO of the Space Force Association. We talked with Bill quite a lot last show, and I encourage you to go check out that show. But we also have Matt Anderson, and I'd like to introduce Matt. So Matt is a retired colonel in the U.S. Air Force, served 24 years, currently working in the civilian sector as a vice president at CACI International, or CACI International, I should say, large technology company. But most importantly, he is the Space Force Association's Chief Growth Officer. So Matt, welcome to the Space Power Show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I appreciate that introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, as you said, I spent an incredible amount of time flying airplanes around the world for the first part of my Air Force career and loved it. But as the career continued on, spent a lot more time thinking about the space domain, working on some combatant staffs, and then finishing my career right there at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado Springs. So as we look to celebrate the 5th birthday of our Space Force, I know Hippie and I are really proud to also announce that this month is the 5th birthday of the Space Force Association. So our president and founder there, Mr. Bill Wolf, founded this great organization 1 month before then President Trump signed it into law on the 20th of December 2019. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And in preparing for the show, I figured out very quickly, you guys know each other. So I'm kind of like the third man out here. So you guys have a little bit of history. So I'd like to talk about the Space Power 2023 show, kind of a retrospective. But first, so Bill, what's the scoop? How did you guys connect?
Yeah, it was. Thanks, Bruce. It was kind of funny. I put this Space Force Association out on LinkedIn. So I created the LinkedIn account for the Space Force Association, and I remember Matt was the first one who reached out on LinkedIn, and he said, "Hey, do you need any help with this?" ? And it was a direct message. And Matt, if I got that wrong, let me know. But it was a direct message, and I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Here's my phone number." And I think it was that afternoon I called him and talked about what was going on, and he was chomping at the bit. He goes, "Hey, I think I can help you with this." And that was, like Matt said, that was 5 years ago, a little less than 5 years ago. So yeah, Matt's been with the organization from inception, and as a Chief Growth Officer, really responsible for helping us continue to grow the organization. So yeah, that it was phenomenal. But I'm sure Matt has a different perspective, and I'm sure he's got plenty of funny stories to go along with it as well.
Yeah, Matt. So what's the scoop? So what made you reach out? Are you just feeling bad for Bill, like he's out there by himself, or what's the deal?
Yeah, I'd like to say it was that simple, but the reality was, as I was working at NORAD and U.S. Northern Command and then U.S. Space Command, I was privy to many classified discussions about the threat. And being an aviator myself, just like we're going to start Space Power Conference 2024 after General Saltzman speaks, we're going to start with a threat brief. And just as an American, I said, hey, we need to all get on board with the challenges we're seeing in the space domain. And when Hippie put out the content about the Space Force Association, I just couldn't wait to get involved. It's a very important. I'm really happy to see as we approach the 5th birthday that the other military services have really bought in as well, and they understand that if the Space Force cannot get space superiority and do its job, then our carrier battle groups, our Army brothers and sisters, our Marines, the air component all over the world, they're not able to do their job, and that puts American lives at stake. So that's really sounds cheesy, but that's what got me involved and has kept me involved. And through this incredible national private nonprofit, we've been able to spread the word about the Space Force. We've raced NASCARs painted in a Space Force theme, around the Air Force Academy the day before the Navy game, just bringing that excitement. And right now at the Air Force Academy, about 10% of every graduating class is going into the Space Force, similar to the model they have at the Naval Academy with the U.S. Marines. However, we don't have enough spots in the Space Force for all the volunteers from the Air Force Academy, those cadets that actually want to join this newest service. So it's a really exciting time. All the things that are happening on the commercial side of space, when you think about Starlink and Elon Musk and catching the Starship with the chopsticks about a month ago, and we're looking at the 6th launch of Starship here soon, there's just a lot of excitement in the commercial side, the civil side, and the national security space, and all those lines are starting to blur. So really excited to be part of this SF team.
Yeah, it definitely is exciting. We'll dive into a little bit deeper on that in a moment, but I want to turn to Space Power 2023. I was talking with Bill a little bit about this earlier, and I realized he had a lot of passion around it, and then I have my own experience with it as well. And just by happenstance, I attended it last year. It was the very first one, but I'm curious, Bill, how did this started in 2019, I guess, and about 5 years. So last year was year number 4. So how did you decide that, hey, it's time for a conference, or why a conference, or were there other options? How did it all come about?
Interesting story. I reached out to, by the way, I didn't want to host a conference. I realized that hosting conferences is a lot of work, and we didn't have the volunteer force to support a large-scale conference, is my thought. That's what I was thinking. But what was ironic is as soon as we made the decision to host a conference, which again, the opportunity, and as Matt, you talk about, this is an exciting time to be in the space domain. And so there's no better conference than to have one that celebrates the Space Force Guardians, celebrates the freedom of action in the space domain, and does it in the month of the Space Force's birthday. And so that was the idea, that was the concept. So I remember reaching out to Space Force leadership, and I just asked them a couple of questions. I asked first, do you want a Space Force Association? And the leadership came back and said, yes, we do. I think it's very important for us to have a dedicated nonprofit advocacy organization supporting our Guardians. I said, great. Because you want the SFA, I think it's important for us to create an opportunity for Guardians to collect and get together, come together and talk about what's happening with the Space Force. So what we would like to do is we would like to host a conference to invite all the Guardians to come down free of charge and really interact with each other, interact with industry, interact with the civil and private sectors. And so that's how it came to fruition. And to your point, last year was our first year putting it on, and it was relatively small, but it was very powerful. And really what I'd like to hear is, your perspective, Bruce, and I think it provided you an opportunity to get involved and learn more about the Space Force Association. But then I want to hear from Matt as well, get your guys' perspective on what you thought about the conference.
Yeah, absolutely. But we'll start with Matt. I'm interested. So Matt, I don't even know what part of the world you're from. Were you East Coast, Central U.S., West Coast? Did you travel? Were you here? What was the story? How'd you get connected on the Space Power last year?
Yeah, I live in Colorado Springs and did travel to that, spent the whole week there. And the conference was incredible. I think there was a lot of smiles. In fact, the First Lady of the Space Force is what I like to call her, General Saltzman's beautiful bride, Jennifer Saltzman, came up to me and said, Matt, I literally think this is the most Guardians I've ever seen in one place. And it was just an opportunity for Guardians at the 4-year point to say, hey, I'm not in this thing alone. A lot of our Guardians are, working around the world in different geographically separated locations from their commanders and the rest of their units. But to bring them all in to Orlando, it was incredible. And I think just the observation from her to say that was really powerful as well.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I'll tell you, my experience was I was a total outsider to military conferences at all. My career, as you know, Bill, is in high tech. So I spent a lot of years in high tech, but completely civilian, like large civilian high tech organizations. And so I was used to conferences where you'd go to Las Vegas, sometimes Orlando, other places, and it'd just be 15,000 people of just doing geeky stuff, seminars, things like that, showrooms, all that, the same jazz. But I heard that there was this conference happening in Orlando, which is where I live. And at the time, the company I have, I was considering getting involved in some military work. Still are, but I thought, well, what better way to kind of get your feet wet than go to some sort of military conference? So I attended, and like you said, Bill, I was or maybe it was you, Matt. I was completely amazed that there were so many Guardians there. I'd never seen that at a conference ever before. And I'll tell you, a couple things struck me. One is General Saltzman sat in the front row and had his staff there the whole time. And I remember even the closing day, right, when Chief Master Sergeant got up and gave his talk. General Saltzman and his team were right there in the front row. That's something that really stood out because you don't see that at civilian conferences. A lot of times the keynote folks will come in and they'll blast out within hours. That kind of commitment was huge, and the fact that there were so many military guardians there who I talked with and got a chance to know, and it had really kind of, as you can tell, it's had a big impact on me. It had really important information, things that I did not know, which was also unusual. Most conferences I go to, I was very, very familiar with what was happening in the industry. So that was really powerful. I was just highly impacted by it. And I got to sit in a little Blue Origin spaceship, right? Everybody loves that kind of stuff. It was on the showroom floor. But it impacted me so much that I reached out. I don't even remember who it was, but I reached out an email afterwards and said, hey, to the volunteer email address, said, hey, I'd be glad to help out. And sure enough, I got an actual phone call a few weeks later. And I thought I was just going to help out, like move some tables and chairs at the next conference. But there was some changes going on. There was some need for some IT help, and all of a sudden here I am. So it's amazing. So to those of you out there listening and watching, if you have thoughts of volunteering, by golly, you can make a way anywhere inside the Space Force Association. So that's really cool. But anyway, Bill, that's my story about Space Power 2023.
Very cool, Bruce. No, it was a lot of fun. I remember I was putting together some remarks, and actually I reached out to Matt as I was putting together these remarks, and I felt compelled to say a bunch of stuff about what SFA is doing and what we're trying to do as an organization. And I sent those remarks over to Matt. Matt looked at me and goes, what are you doing? He said, no, those aren't any of the remarks. He goes, you're not testifying in front of Congress. You are talking to a bunch of folks who are excited about being in the Space Force. They're excited about helping the Space Force. He said, talk from the heart. Talk about what this conference is all about. Let Guardians know that they got an opportunity to speak with each other, to interact with each other, to solve all the world's problems over an adult beverage maybe in the afternoon, talk with industry about how industry can help, because, everybody wants to see the Space Force excel. And the way I talked about it, and so I didn't provide any of the remarks that I had prepared. And then it even got a little bit funnier because right before I went on stage, Space Force leadership looked over at me and basically said, hey, they didn't come here to hear you. And so he said, keep comments short. And so I went up on stage and I kept comments very short, acknowledged my dad who was in the audience, celebrating his 80th birthday this year, who actually did intelligence for the U-2 spy plane back in the 60s. And so, to take that and talk about access to and using speed and altitude to gain access to produce intelligence, and then to see where we're at now from a space perspective to do the same thing. You want to talk about speed and altitude, nothing gets higher or faster than something orbiting the Earth. So I just made that quick connection between his support to the intelligence community and how his legacy is going to live on, because he had no idea that those contributions he made in his military service carried on to where we're at today at SFA. So quick comments, got off the stage, but then I remember General Saltzman getting up on the stage and he turned around and he took a selfie with the entire audience because he'd never seen so many Guardians in one place. And I remember I photobombed that one too. I couldn't help it. And so I had two pictures after the conference, one of him doing a selfie with the Guardians in the background, and then one of he and I with the Guardians in the background. So that's up on our website now. It's kind of funny. But yeah, it was an honor to kick that conference off, to get that conference going. Very small exhibition hall, if you really want to call it that, last year. Didn't have a lot of exhibitors come out. Folks I think were just trying to see if we could get it done. And quite honestly, a lot of industry was wondering whether we could get it done because we're in a continuing resolution. So,
That's right.
That's tough to try to do something with the military anytime you're in a CR, which, by the way, we need to stop having. And I'm hoping that we can get through that in the new administration. So Yeah, great time the first year, and now we've got nowhere to go but up for the second year.
Yeah, tell me. So obviously the photo with General Saltzman with you and all the Guardians, that's a highlight. What are some other highlight moments? I'd love to hear from both of you guys about what you thought were some of the best moments.
Yeah, well, Bruce, I think, you hit the nail on the head when you said the senior leadership of the Space Force was sitting in that front row. And I think it's appropriate to also mention, one of the coolest things about our country is civilian control of the military. So unlike third world nations around the world where they're always worried about a coup from the four-star generals taking over the government, there was a gentleman that sat in the front row by the name of the Honorable Frank Calvelli. He did not move from that seat. And his position is an appointed position that was a new position when the Space Force created, and you've got a civilian in charge of the space acquisition side of the house. And Mr. Calvelli did not move from that. He loved Space Power 23, and it was important because he got to hear from the operators. And as the guy that's running the money and acquiring capability, you're right, it sends a message. When the four stars are sitting there, General Whiting is another one, now the commander of U.S. Space Command. He sat there, he loved it. Even when we brought, billionaire Jared Isaacman on stage to talk about Polaris Dawn mission that just successfully landed, by the way, in September, everybody was just glued to the stage and listening to what's going on the commercial side of space and how can the national security space take advantage of it. And we're seeing that right now with SpaceX, the Starlink satellites, and if you Google a little deeper, you can learn more about Starshield, the defense side of the Starlink, and it's really a game changer for our nation. So I thought that was great seeing the Honorable Calvelli there, and I think it's important for SFA. This week has been an important week for our country. A peaceful transition of power will happen on the 20th of January. And whether Frank Kendall, the Secretary of the Air Force, and Frank Calvelli remain or not, that is still to be seen. But whether they are or not, it's appropriate for SFA to thank them for their leadership and for really preparing the Space Force and our nation for great power competition. And a lot of people think the Secretary of the Air Force, that doesn't have the word space in it in his job title, but he is the civilian secretary over both the Air Force and the Space Force. And it was incredible when he came out with his operational imperatives as the secretary to give his guidance to those two military services. He named a resilient and effective space order of battle as one of those operational imperatives. In other words, this is one of my main priorities if we're going to fight and win in this era of great power competition. So I think, huge thanks from SFA to those two gentlemen, no matter where their careers take them post January 20th. But General Saltzman deserves a lot of credit too. He used the inaugural Space Power Conference to set the path for 2024, the 5th year of this service. And he has clearly demonstrated over 2024 his commitment to completely transforming the Space Force into a warfighting service. And that's very different than Air Force Space Command and the legacy missions that the Air Force held before. And he's doing it by 3 ways. When I first talked to Hippie about forming SFA, all he could talk about was we have to gain and maintain space superiority. And those airmen out there that flew airplanes understood what air superiority meant. You have complete superiority of your domain. And that is not any different from the maritime domain, the land domain, or the air domain, but space superiority is his #1 priority, and it should be. Assured access to space is the second one. And I think the third one is what we've seen 2024, the global mission operations, making sure that every combatant command around the world, whether that's PACOM, INDOPACOM, EUCOM, CENTCOM, they have a space component commander. And we've seen him change, Chachi Mastelier over in PACOM as a 1-star. General Saltzman just upgraded that position over in Europe to a 1-star. U.S. Forces Korea, U.S. Space Forces in Korea is now an 06. But it takes time in a young military service to get those billets, to train the right officers. Those component commanders are in the same room with their peers. And guess what? Those peers, they're 4-star generals. They've been there forever. So, the commander of the Air Forces in the Pacific is a 4-star. The commander of the Air Forces in Europe is a 4-star. The Space Force is punching way above their weight with colonels and 1-stars. And I think, in my opinion, we're going to continue to see those ranks increase as the service increases, but it's a credit to General Saltzman for that focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you say that. I remember there was a quote, it was from a Marine general, and I'm not sure if he was he must have been quoted at the Space Power Show, but essentially it was, hey, if we don't have, you know, superiority over the space domain, nothing else is going to matter. I mean, you know, and there's just so much truth to that. And being as young as the Space Force is, you know, I was trying to get a read on that, and maybe you guys know, but I don't even know how many people are in the Space Force. But it's surely not hundreds of thousands. And I'm just wondering, what is our trajectory? I don't know if you guys are, you know, want to.
Yeah, I'll take that one for
opinion
sure.
on that.
I'll take that one for sure. You know, when the Space Force was signed into law, say, hey, here's your X amount that we're going to authorize you. The bottom line is, you know, Congress, and rightfully so, is saying, hey, we don't want to create a new military service that's just going to grow out of control and have unnecessary government spending. So really, if you go onto Peterson's Space Force base, it's not a Space Force guardian a cop that's checking your ID. That is an airman. If you have a problem with your finance, you go to finance. It's not a guardian, it's an airman. And the point is, we only have guardians that are doing the space mission that requires a guardian. And all the support for personnel, their airmen brothers and sisters are taking care of that for them. But right now, we're just under 10,000 guardians. 10,000 for a global mission with the largest area of responsibility, above 100,000 kilometers everywhere around the world. And that's being done with just under 10,000 active duty guardians, and their civilian brothers and sisters takes it up to around, you know, ultimately 16,000 or so. But you know, that's the size of small, that's Army units, and we're talking a whole military service. So it's really impressive. But you know, that brings up, you know, force design is one of General Saltzman's priorities as well. And one of the unique things he did in 2024 is, you know, he announced, hey, we're going to have a new field command. It's going to be called Space Futures Command. This is going to be thinking way out into the future. And the purpose of Space Futures Command is hey, they're going to ensure the Space Force's long-term technical advantage in space is always better than our adversaries. It's going to contain 3 centers. It's going to be geographically separated from each other. But we're expecting that to be IOC, or initial operating capability, in 2025. And but you know, one thing that the service has also realized is we cannot, partner to win is, you're going to hear partner to win, and that's huge. And that means we have to partner. If you have less than 10,000 guardians in this entire global fight, you've got to get a bunch of friends on your side. And you know, General Saltzman again hit one out of the park. He said, you know what, I'm going to bring in Air Marshal Paul Godfrey from the UK. And he named him the first foreign exchange assistant chief of space operations. So he has an international officer as his assistant in the Pentagon, and stood up a brand new office called the Office of Future Concepts and Partnerships, and said, hey, I entrust you, an international officer, to lead this effort for me. And it's incredible. And Air Marshal Godfrey is just an amazing human. And that type of forward thinking and a smaller service, I think, is actually an advantage, instead of sometimes the bureaucracy, 700,000-800,000 person services. When you start thinking about the Army and the Air Force and the reserve component, the guard component, it gets really big. And I really love the flexibility of the Space Force that you know, with that size. But I think, to be honest, there's no way it will not grow. The mission is so important. You talk about carrier strike groups. If we had a Taiwan scenario in China where we're pushing the U.S. Navy out of Hawaii, and we're starting to move brigades in the Army, and all the air forces that it would take for a situation like that, without the Space Force doing their job, many would say those are just targets. Mm-hmm. The Space Force is so critical, and I think that's the Marine that said that you heard. That's what they're referring to.
Yeah, for sure. You know, it's interesting. I just a quick personal story. My daughter recently graduated from college, and she was in Air Force, ROTC, and she couldn't go in the Space Force because she's a nurse. But shout out to her, she's at Dayton. But there were several of the of her buddies who did choose the Space Force, and I don't know, there's probably a name for them, but I'm gonna just call them, you know, Space Force natives, right? Because that'll be the service that they commissioned into, unlike, you know, the majority of the Space Force today came from the Air Force. And I think those guardians are probably, you know, their perspective is going to be different, and it's going to be entirely focused on that mission from the very beginning of their career. I think they're the ones that are going to make a real difference, because it is competitive. You know, the space domain is competitive. We don't want it to be that way. I don't want it to be that way. But I think it is competitive today, and the very best Guardians are going to be required to win that battle. So yeah, well said. Hey, I want to shift back to a couple things before we. I love behind the scenes stories. So Bill, I'm going to ask you for a couple behind the scenes stories that stick out in your mind from last year, and then I want to talk about Space Power 2024. So what are a couple of things that, I mean, was it sitting around at the bar? Is it like, just before people went on? I mean, something that, attendees like me didn't necessarily see that you think made a difference for Space Power 2023?
Well, the first thing I would say is without volunteers, going back to the point, remember I said that I didn't think we had enough volunteers to execute Space Power. The funny thing is, as soon as you put the event out there and then you do a call for, it was so, I was just so surprised to see so many people come together and say, I want to help. How can I help? And so we threw out the call for volunteers for Space Power last year, and we had more volunteers than we knew what to do with. We had a team of probably 50, 60 volunteers working 8-10 hour shifts to ensure Space Power went off without a hitch. It was remarkable. I mean, that's the thing you don't see very often or hear about is, you see an event take place and you go, hey, that was a great event. The fact is, there's a team of people, a phenomenal team of people behind the scenes making sure that everything is being executed perfectly. So big hats off and big thank you to the volunteer team that came together, including yourself and even Matt. Both you guys phenomenal volunteers. So I appreciate your continued support of your SFA. That's one thing. The other is, and Matt gave me feedback on this, whenever you do a run of show, that's that agenda that gets you kind of through and executes all the stuff that's going on in the show. You want to be able to give that to somebody and say, hey, go execute that. The fact is, we hadn't gone through the details. And so what I felt to do is make sure everything was running okay. So I found myself running back and forth, to your point, behind the scenes, making sure speakers are getting set up, making sure folks are getting introduced correctly on stage. And so we're going to tighten that up a lot this year. But those are a couple of things. But what I want to do is I want to transition over, because Matt said a couple of really good points about where we're going this year in the programming. And so the first thing he talked about is futures, or one of the things he talked about was futures. So Air Marshal Godfrey, it was phenomenal. He reached out and said, actually his staff reached out and said, hey, is Air Marshal Godfrey invited to the Space Power Conference 24? I said, absolutely, he's invited. And then I started engaging with his staff, and I said, not only is he invited, what does he want to speak about? So he can speak on the international panel. So we have an international panel for the first time this year, which is really exciting. Going back to Matt's point, when you have a military service that's so small, you rely on all the disparate partnerships you can bring together. And so that's why the theme of this year's conference is Together Above, because it's not just partnership with the internationals, it's partnership with the private sector, it's partnership with the civil sector, and national security is all coming together. And then academic kind of underpins all of that to ensure that everyone's getting educated. So those are kind of the big themes. So Air Marshal Godfrey is going to be there for sure. And then you made a point, Bruce, about what we call Guardians who didn't transition. Well, we have a panel that's called Guardian Identity. And we're bringing what we call OGs, or Original Guardians.
There we go.
So the OGs are going to be there representing, and Chief Carmen Pogue from STARCOM is helping us curate that panel. And she's going to reach out to some Guardians from across the service and ask them to provide their perspective as Original Guardians. So I mean, if you don't know the Space Force exists, one, it does, and two, because the Space Force exists and you want to learn about it, you've got to come to Space Power 24. Tickets are going fast, and so now's the time to get your ticket and show up and learn everything you can about the Space Force, because we're going to have the senior leaders from the Space Force and probably another 1,000 Guardians there again this year to again take part of a Space Force celebration, week, and they're going to be there the whole week, and it's going to be a great time. And that culminates, by the way, and we've got the gala that's happening, the birthday gala on Wednesday night, and we're going to be handing out awards there, and we got some special invited guests that we hope will show up at the gala. And then we've got the T-10 miler that Patrick Space Force Base puts on every year. So folks I think General Shava is going to be at that one on Saturday. And so that takes place at the end of the week there on Saturday. But from a programming perspective, I mean, it's all about identifying the opportunity to help each other out for the commercial private sector to help the Space Force, for the internationals to describe how they can fill capability gaps with the Space Force. And then we walk away from the conference understanding how we actually work together and partner to ensure freedom of action in the space domain.
Yeah, that's I'm excited about this year. So just for everyone who's listening, it's December 10th through the 12th, and it's in Orlando, Florida. And I'm not sure, I live in Orlando, so I'm not going to be staying at the hotel. Do you remember the hotel, Bill? I don't remember that off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's a Hilton Orlando on International Drive.
Okay, perfect. Oh, on iDrive. That's a fun place to be for all you out-of-towners. So yeah, you can hit the Space Force Association website. It's ussfa.org. And the first thing that will pop up will be about the Space Power Conference. So you can get all the details. You can register. And I'm assuming this year again, the Guardians are welcomed and at no charge. Is that true?
That's correct.
Yeah. So if you're a Guardian, come on over.
Yeah. Hey, Bruce, I got I think that's important point there is to, our industry partners, we can't do this without our industry partners. And I've had the pleasure of being the director of outreach for SFA, the chief operating officer, now the chief growth officer. And that's code for, hey, we need to get our industry partners to invest in this. And we have seen an incredible support from our industry partners to put this thing on. There are other trade shows where, government or Guardians are not allowed to go if they don't pay a couple $1,000s or something like that. And we're making it free for the Guardians, as it should be. But I did want to give you one story kind of behind the scenes, because I know that's what you were looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm biased, but one of my favorite times at Space Power 23 was I got the opportunity to moderate a panel with billionaire Jared Isaacman, Kid Poteet, and General Purdy. And we were talking about, the Polaris Dawn mission. And Hippie and I were lucky enough to be a guest of Jared Isaacman when he launched on Inspiration 4 just over 3 years ago. And we brought Jared in to talk about Polaris Dawn. We knew it was going to happen in 2024. But behind the scenes, we talked to Jared, and there's a U.S. Space Force Historical Foundation that wanted to meet with Jared and talk about potentially saying, hey, can we help out, document some of this incredible Space Force history that's going on right now, so that just like the other services have their museums and stuff. Well, we had a private meeting with Jared, and in May of this past year, they announced that Jared Isaacman gave an unbelievable donation to the Brevard Space Force Museums down in Florida. And proud to say that Jared will be back to Space Power 24 this year. He was at the Wednesday night gala. We gave him a little award. And incredible mission. If you didn't get to see it, Polaris Dawn, the first civilian spacewalk ever, the furthest any human's been out in space since the Apollo missions. Furthest any females have ever been out in space. This all happened in September of this year. And by the way, this is not a government program. This is private commercial space missions. The first time the SpaceX suit had ever been exposed to the vacuum of space. Everything went incredible, and Jared's coming back again this year. And you mentioned the 4-star sitting in the front row, and every one of them was just, loved that panel. And we're just really thankful for Jared Isaacman's generosity to the Space Force Association. And he doesn't, every time he goes up on a mission or he's thinking about what commercial space can do for national security, he says, Matt and Hippie, hey, please tell the Guardians, thanks for keeping an eye on us when we're up there and keeping us safe. So just thought I'd share that insider story. It was a really great part of Space Power 23.
That is a great insider story, and I saw that session, that panel. It was, I was glued to my seat, just hanging on every word. So that's awesome, and glad he's going to be back this year. That'll be really good. Hey, so speaking of this year, so So we've got a theme, and but you know, beyond that, I'm wondering what kinds of things you'd like to see happen out of the conference. In other words, Bill, when you look at it, I think there's, as you already talked about, there's a ton of work that goes into it. So everybody has to pull together. There's volunteers, and we didn't talk about it here, but there's actually an SFA staff now. So there's paid staff. So that's a huge evolution for SFA. But all the team will be working on everything. But taking a step back from that, what kinds of things are you thinking you'd like to see happen out of it?
Yeah, so the whole concept of space power, and the reason why we have it at the end of the year, one, because it coincides with the Space Force's birthday, but two, it allows for us to summarize all the activities that have taken place in the space domain. You know, what the Space Force has done, what SFA has done, what industry has done. And so it should be a reflection on the past year and what we've accomplished, and then describing a future that we want to have in the next year. So it really is not just a reflection, but a prescription on how we'd like to see 2025. And so what happens is, even from an SFA perspective, you know, that's just a conference. It's a great conference, but that's it. It's a summary of the activities. What I'd like to see is the programming that takes place in introducing that programming for 2025 during Space Power 24. So, for example, the Space Professional Society, that's a program. That's something that SFA would like to focus on. And what that does is it starts to create a workforce opportunity for young kids in universities to understand what it's like to start their space career. Whether they go into national security or go into the private, commercial, or civil sectors. You know, back when I started my space career in the Air Force, there wasn't a workforce development program. You know, there was no way to start my space professional career. So we want these young kids who are excited about space to understand how they can get involved. But that even goes you know, that's the college level, but it even goes earlier in your life, because we know by the time you're 13, kids have already decided what they're going to do with their lives. So we've got to go back to even in grade school. So the Space Force Cadet Corps, which we partnered with, allows that programming to happen. So these are types of programs that SFA wants to create and initiate. However, all of that takes time, and it takes money, and it takes resources. And, you know, we'd love to do as much as we can with the volunteers we've got, but the fact is we can't ask volunteers to do a full-time job as a volunteer working for SFA. So we've got to raise the resources necessary to execute some of these programs that allow young kids to get excited about space, stay excited about space, and then start their career in space. Because we've got a tremendous workforce development challenge ahead of us if we don't get in front of it and allow these kids to start their space careers as young as possible. So that's an example of what I'd like to see come out of Space Power 24.
Yeah, that's actually, and you know, I know this about you. You have a real passion for developing kind of the next generation of Space Force and just space interested young adults. That's awesome. Hey, so a little bit of the just kind of the practical kinds of things. You want to give us a high-level view of the agenda and some of the speakers, and kind of you know, I know General Saltzman will be there again with his team, but just give us a little sense of who's going to be there.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt. I know you've been doing some research on this. I've been working the agenda, by the way, for folks who folks are getting frustrated with me because they're like, "Hey, I've not seen the agenda," and I said, "Well, it's because I'm working, and if I'm working on it, you know, it's going to take a little bit more time." So I'm doing a line by line of the agenda, trying to take in all the requests from the various speakers. We got some phenomenal speakers coming in this year, really excited about. I mean, General Buck is coming back. He's a mentor of mine. He's at the RPH, great sponsor of Space Power 24. He is moderating a panel that talks about how industry is responding to the threats in space. Because a lot of people don't think about it. You know, they start questioning, why do we need a Space Force? And just like what Matt was talking about, when you've got private spacewalks happening that Jared Isaacman did, the Polaris Dawn mission, that is because there's a freedom of action in space provided by the United States Space Force. Same with the commercial sector. So we can't have a $1.3 trillion economy that the U.S. partners and allies are in front of unless we have freedom of action in the domain. So, and we're going to see the line blur, I think, quite a bit between the commercial and national security sector, as evidenced by Starshield and what SpaceX is doing with Starshield. So, you got Starlink, which is commercial, which I'm using right now, and then you got Starshield, which is supporting national security mission sets using that critical infrastructure. So that line between the commercial sector and national security sector is going to start becoming much more blurred, and it's going to have to be at the same time refined. And we have to institute the policies. So that's one of the panels we're hosting is what is commercial doing to help mitigate the threat provided in the space domain, because the Space Force is such a small organization, it's critical to partner. But I'll pause there and let Matt chime in.
Yeah, it's the thing that's incredible about this, Bruce, is General Saltzman, which was Hippie's vision from day one, is viewing this as the Space Forces conference. And as the chief of space operations, that's code for saying it's Salty's conference. And when you have, an organization like a military service, when the 4-star says this is my conference, it's shocking who shows up to that thing. So we've got all we've got the general officers on the Space Force staff. We've got Spock with General Rock Miller, General Chess, Space Forces Space. We've got basically every general officer, multiple of the Delta commanders. The PEOs will be coming out from LA Air Force Base. They'll be there doing a PEO panel, which is always great for industry to see where they're at, what they're thinking about, where the money's going. And really that's the engine behind the whole machine is, hey, how do we get industry involved? So we got that PEO panel, which I'm really excited about. That's direct access to the PEOs. And the other thing, when you said, hey, what are we looking forward to? I'm just looking forward to these Guardians realizing the incredible culture and the family atmosphere that they have within the Space Force, because like any military service, the amount of accessions, people coming into the service and those leaving the service changes so often. And the Space Force, with its small size and agile size, you're meeting new people every other month that seem to be coming into the Space Force. And so the people that were there last year, you can't assume they've ever been there before this year. So they're new. This is gonna be their first space power conference, and they heard about it last year. Our industry brothers and sisters heard about it last year. They're hitting me up still. They're like, hey man, looks like all the rooms are sold out. How do I get one? I said, well, Orlando's a big city. Find another room, but just show up and it's gonna be a great time. But honestly, what people talked about last year is like, I can't believe that I can go to the hotel bar and see every single senior leader in the Space Force right there and go up and shake their hand and thank them for what they're doing. That is incredible access, and it's a credit to those leaders to do that, because they have a lot going on, especially with everything at the senior levels in our government right now. By the way, there's a day job, there's a mission. We've got great power competition with China and Russia in the space domain. And of course, there's gonna be Guardians, keeping their hand on the tiller back home, but we just can't wait to get to them. It's a huge reunion. And I'm personally looking forward to the gala that Wednesday night. The 80s band last year was next level.
Oh man, that was one thing I missed. 80s band, wow, that brings people in, brings them out of the, even my son, who's in his 20s, likes the 80s stuff. So it's kind of crazy how that works. But yeah, it's interesting because to me, again, from an outsider perspective at the time, to me it seemed like it was a forum, not just for tremendous dissemination of information. I mean, there was tons of, like I said, tons of great information. There were books that people recommended that I purchased right there in the session. I gotta read that book that guy's talking about. But it's more about the ability to connect outside of a meeting classified environment between industry folks and the military team. And to your point, Matt, the fact that you could just go and connect with almost every single senior leader in the Space Force in one location and just hang out, that's incredible. That's unprecedented kind of connectivity. And that can only be a huge, huge benefit to things going on. Hey, so we're starting to wind down here. I got to get to the tech corner, but tell me one thing people may not know or think about with this conference. Something that you're thinking about that's like, what people may not know about that, and could be an interesting thing for them.